Hello, my name is Michael Sandoval,
And I'm Chris Detzel.
and welcome everyone to another edition of Peers Over Beers. And we were discussing a little bit about what today's topic of discussion was going to be. And we kind of went all over the map. We were talking about sales and internal and like enterprise. Then we went into content. That was another kind of brainstorm idea. And then we said, oh, it would be a really good story to talk about how we drove content at our community, right? thegrid.rexel.com. And I think we'll split this into two parts because there's an element where we did it for Germany, extra to our globalization piece. And then we'll leave that a second because I think that's another fascinating story how we got there. And but we were talking a lot about how we drove the initial content on the grid. Right?
Yeah, I was curious around how, when you first started the grid, I wasn't there the first year, just on the North America side. And I was very curious on how you thought about content and what was your strategy around that in the very beginning, because I think over time it changed a little bit, and I think that's normal. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think when you were coming in, I think it was our kind of second entry into the United States. Because when we first started, we looked at data, and again, from my previous experience, going in, when you wanted to create community, you want to have the biggest bang for your buck. English is the most well-spoken language in the globe.
Go first.
Yep, exactly correct. The ones who are probably the most advanced with using this type of software are just more social, if you will, are Americans.
Yeah.
And to give some context, the grid.rexel.com is a community that's devoted to electricians. So when we talk about the electrician community, just think about the guy or gal, and I'm going to say guy because it's mostly guys,
Right.
who come and fix your wall socket or outlet, if you will, right?
Yep.
And so that is our audience. Those are our audience, they are our audience. And when we first went in there, it would just seem a natural forward. There was already existing communities out there. They were quite vibrant on you just name your favorite.
That's right.
And it was a natural thing. So when we started going in there, we had branded it as a branded community with Rexel, and we weren't getting a lot of traction. And part of that was, even though we had the right understanding of the customer and what they needed, I think one of the challenges, or at least one of my aha moments, was that our brand wasn't that strong in the United States. Rexel is a brand, right? And in fact, in fact, there was a little bit of a downward pressure on the community. So there was some resistance from folks signing up. And of course, this led us to going to, when this became something we knew, we decided to go to a country in which the brand value was higher, which is the Germany discussion.
Well, we did go into Germany, but if you remember when I first got there, you mentioned that I really should start in France. So I don't know if you remember that. And so I spent a ton of effort, actually in the United States, which you already knew. You were like, yeah, you can spend time here, but just so you know, Chris, this is not going to be well. I mean, do what you want. And I think you were kind of letting me just learn. And so with that, I also went to France and started talking to them. And although they were highly interested in a community for a lot of different reasons, the French don't make decisions quickly. They don't. I mean, it's a cultural thing, and so I didn't really know that. I've worked with the French, but not really one-on-one, day-to-day, until then. And so, in addition to France, which I stayed in contact with this lovely person, Ash, to kind of guide her through some of that stuff over time. But we figured, hey, why not also try Germany? Probably 6 months into my to me being at Rexel.
Yeah, your tenure. Yep.
Yeah. So I think that then we went into Germany, and then quickly, because they really wanted to get stuff done quickly, and so they were very open to a German community.
Yep. And we'll talk about Germany as a side. We'll kind of bring it back up. But it's interesting from the beginning with our discussion we were talking about that. So that kind of gives you a little bit of backstory of how we got there. But regardless, when we came back into the United States, we did come back in with a lot more understanding and data. And we had a different approach going in. Our initial thought was to help the customer through answering questions about what is the right product for me. And I think we started to come around is in two areas. One was about thought leadership. So this is where the KNX stuff, and for those who don't know, KNX we'll describe later. And a little bit about support questions, right? Things that were, as customers were going through their sales cycle, what are the things that were commonly being asked? So we worked very closely with the support team, the online chat support team, and popping
live
in
chat,
those,
et cetera.
live chat, et cetera, exactly. So what I've done in my past with regards to content is and I think even you probably have done the same thing too, and every community manager who kickstarts their community is that they have to, my old adage, right? Never go to a party, or don't go to a party that
Nobody's at.
Yeah, exactly, correct.
The way I tell that, Michael, is nobody wants to go to a party that no one's at, right? So, you really have to get people there and make it sound fun and cool and all these things.
So when you start, we had to get content from someplace, right? So I remember. So part of our strategy was around where does content exist today, right? So there were two main sources of content that I know existed, actually three. But the first two, one is around the sales team. So the sales team has, and this is what I call, I used to do a blog called Tribal Knowledge, and this is where I believe, and you probably heard me call this content where, we store a lot of information in our heads independently.
That's right.
And it's not until you're a part of that tribe does that knowledge come out. But tribes can be in different parts of the company. So I call it about unleashing tribal knowledge. So they have an enormous amount of customer insights, customer data, support. And so one was around how do I culturally shift that and allow them to use the grid or the community to kind of push that out. That's one area. The second was around support content, right?
Yeah.
So, and this may be true on some people's enterprises where it's a really good idea to kind of move a full circle. So customers come and ask questions one-on-one. Are there some insights that are from those questions that you can now push as knowledge articles to the community, right? And then the third piece was around this question on knowledge, right? So this was the whole, I remember you were spearheading this whole thing around wiki articles.
Yep.
And that drove a lot of traffic.
Tons of SEO.
Tons of SEO.
It took time, but it really did.
Yeah. So, and this is not just SEO for the sake of SEO. We were actually interviewing some of our sales staff about what are the current problems that our customers have today. We would pull out some specific.
We put a strategy in place to say, how do we go get some of this really good content? And part of that strategy was to take some of those experts within some of the experts that knew what they were talking about in a certain area, like automation or whatever it was, and we'd interview them. We'd hire somebody to interview them and write blogs and content, and so that really drove good stuff. And then really, at the end of the day, what were we trying to do? The strategy was to get people to go to our e-commerce sites from our community and then create a login through the e-commerce site and go buy. At the end of the day, that's what we were trying to do.
Yep, exactly. And there are great stories that we've had about customers looking up for something very specific on Google. They come in, they read an article, we can see them reading, they click on a product recommendation, it goes to that product, they put it in their shopping cart, and then they're out in the merry way.
Something that Michael was always good at is finding the story of what the value of community was, especially to our e-commerce sites. So I remember one example was a customer typed something in Google. So Michael would find all this data just from Google Analytics and really taught me a ton about the analytics piece. But customer would they'd go to Google, they would search, and then they would go to the grid, and then they would read some stuff around the grid. They would then click on the link that we sent them to by product. So we were talking about specific products. They'd click on that link. They'd go to the e-commerce site, create a login, and then buy. Like we could follow that whole entire cycle, the buying cycle, and that was, it was awesome to watch. It took us some time to find the stories, but if you know the right analytical people, they can help, and of course, you were very good at Google Analytics too.
Definitely had my hand in it.
Those things are a lot of fun to me. And we heard this today talking to some other community managers. Is you have to tell the story. Is why are customers coming to your site? Whether it's customers saying that your community is super cool because of these things, or you go find the story within the community itself, like you did.
Yep.
And that's what good content brings.
Yeah, exactly. It
Content
brings us
strategy.
right back to how we did our content strategy. So very clear, it was three main pieces. One, go get content for where it existed. Where's the tribe holding their content?
Yeah.
Convince them that this is the right place to go put it, and then drive that part of the strategy. That's a longer tentpole problem because it's about convincing people and then showing how this is valuable. Two was centered around this idea of knowledge content, right? So this is about original article content. And that we used some of the insights that come from Google, what we knew about our site overall, a lot of interviews with salespeople, and then we would find the right subject matter experts, and then we would just interview them, right?
Yeah.
On that, we did get some help to do some copywriting, so it wasn't all of us. I wasn't the one writing, you weren't the one writing. We actually had a writer do it.
Somebody's like, "Are you going to produce the content?"
Sure. When I find somebody to write the blog,
And,
I'm good at all that.
Yeah. And then the third piece was around support articles, right? So if there was not especially in a company that doesn't have that full circle approach of taking insights from customers through the support cycle, how do we take those articles and throw them online, right? And over time, one is easier than the other. And part of the knowledge articles and support pieces were very easy to go off and put on the website. That started driving SEO. It's what started to drive traffic, and that's what slowly got people into the use case study that you just talked about earlier.
Yeah. So, quick question for you, and
Yep.
it's not completely off the topic, because I heard this one day. It's when you look at like a website, let's say Rexel.com or RexelUSA.com or whatever that is there is there a difference between, let's say, or I don't know the exact question, but let me try here. So, is there equity when you look at RexelUSA.com and then you create a community, the grid.rexel.com? Is there equity that kind of goes into that helps the grid.rexel.com because of the equity that Rexel USA has?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's part of acquisition, right? So we were talking about, okay, great. In the next phase, now that we have content on the website, how do you start driving eyeballs, right? I remember we had this conversation too. Well, the eyeballs come from a few sources, right? They're going to come from Google. They're going to come directly, or they're going to come from referrers. One of the biggest referrers is the actual e-commerce site, right?
Yeah.
And of course, on the SEO side, since we didn't have a lot of equity to begin with, to start off, people needed to be pointing to us.
So you're saying that referrals is the equity piece. So if they're
Yeah.
on RexelUSA.com and we're showing our content specifically from the community, then obviously they're going to pick
Yeah.
that. Okay.
A rising, was it called? Rising water lifts all ships or something like that. So it starts to, they start to help each other. And it also works in the other way too, right? So part of, this is another really good one to talk about, like where does community fit in the overall content strategy for the big company, right?
Yep.
So on the,
Well, I'm very interested in that.
so,
You'll have to talk about most of that.
yeah, no, because, especially for product e-commerce sites where they're just maniacally focused on getting you to the product, right? How do you go through the process of knowing which is the right product, right? It's the which versus what, that kind of interesting question. And so there was a big gap in content in the decision process. So you have a customer who type in a product number, and by golly, the e-commerce site pops up with a product. Okay, great, perfect. But if you asked what is the right LED or the right IoT switch for enter some concept, you would go to probably some other website and maybe get lost and never return
Yeah,
as a
that's
result,
right,
right?
yeah.
So this filled, all these things we're putting in place from these 3 different sources we talked about was starting to fill that SEO gap. And we started to see it. We started to see people coming in and asking questions like, what is the right KNX type of products? What are and these are not, I put in a very specific product number and I'm getting to a product. They were asking the what if questions. How-tos.
Remember,
Help
KNX
me.
is a European thing, though.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, but,
KNX
yeah.
is, exactly.
But that was one big topic in Germany and
Yep.
even in France that was very popular.
Yep. And that's what started the role, right? That's what started the community
It did.
to start getting some of that content. And then as a result, I think we were looking at, okay, great. If we are starting to see this traffic, we should put in a number about what the percentage of, what is the right percentage of new user acquisition we should be seeing as a result of this traffic, right?
Yeah.
And I think we were shooting for 10%.
We
I think
were.
it was. And it's not that was a magic number or anything. I'm sure for other community managers, they've seen higher,
Yep.
maybe even lower. But that, for
was a
us,
start,
seemed
right?
start, right? Exactly
Yep.
correct. Just at the beginning. And I think it started from 5, started moving to 7. I think we started to see it, especially when the content started to improve.
Yep.
We started to see that number move up, which was very nice. Which led into the other problem we were talking about earlier, right? When you were talking about Canada and getting them all up and going.
Yeah.
And their first, what was that, maybe second, maybe foray podcast. Oh, great, we have all these people now. What do we,
Yeah,
what do we go
we-
do with?
I think I mentioned we had 2,000 in the first few months, and then eventually we got up to 4,000, and that was a problem. It's like, well, what do we do with these people now? And so, we had to develop this whole process of how to reach out to them and things like that.
Yep. And so that's just a very simple, for us, that for us was a very simple case study about how we got content, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure from others there are other ways to do it. And to give you some more context about the company, right? This is a company that never understood social, didn't understand how it applied to B2B. And I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who are in companies in which information is very inwardly thinking, secure. They only want to release information to certain customers at a certain time. And by golly, we had that as well. People were protecting their own customers because they didn't want other sales teams to get into their business and all this other stuff. So they thought that by opening this information up, it would create, an avenue for.
I think that's true, but the people I talked to were like that. And so what I did was when I get on the phone with them, I would talk to them and I would get them excited about what digital, because no one really knew what digital was at Rexel. I mean, there's some people obviously that were hired to do digital, but when you think of the people that have been there for 30 years, 40 years, they've heard of things coming and going. And so this new digital thing that you're talking about, the community and e-commerce and things like that, was just something that's probably not going to be around for long. It's just another one thing. Literally, when you think of Rexel, they've been around for 60 plus years, 70,
Yeah.
I don't even know the exact. And so some of the people were very closed off, but when you start talking about what digital can do, when you think about how many people, when I would tell them this little story, they started thinking about that. I was like, one, when you go search something and you need an answer to something online, where do you go? Google, right? And so every answer was Google. I go, exactly. I said, just think about this. When a customer has a question about something around automation or a plug of some sort or something, wires, and they type in Google, right now, Rexel is not coming up. I go, you could type in, maybe you type in a part number or something like that, maybe it comes up. But other than that, nothing about, how do you do this? How do you do that with certain things? And so when you start explaining that, like, there could be 500 people in a day or thousands of people in a day looking for something similar to that question and typing it in Google. And if I could be the first one to pop up on Google, then I win.
Yep.
Right? And so
Yep, I agree.
I go, you have 20 customers. You have 100 customers. You know how many customers I have? I have thousands upon thousands of customers that I have to get this right. And they're like, oh.
and they got excited, man. It was like this, oh, okay, well, cool. How can I help?
Yeah.
And so they were closed off. But if you show a bit of excitement and belief, because we know that Google is the key, SEO is the key, right? To being on, you've got to create content, and then if you do that, then you'll be close to the first page. Hopefully, the first page is the goal.
Yep. And one of the things you did very well, which is you would go into those sales guys and go one by one.
Yeah.
But it was hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, it was hand-to-hand combat, and you had definitely some converters, right? And you even had
course.
some good stories around how naysayers became positive advocates, right?
Yeah. Yeah, these guys that I remember were older in the automation team, they're here in Dallas, and I'd go out there and see them and say, hey, look, just come up with some questions. Just what are some normal questions about automation? And, it's hard to be put on the spot. And so I tried to make it comfortable for them. And okay, let's just say I'm going into a Rexel store and I need something around, I don't know, I'd make some stuff up. And then they'd be, oh, well, no, that's this. Great. Well, what are some common questions around these things? Well, how do you install it? What do you do first? And so they started going into that. Go, see, these are the questions I want. So I would get them in a room and I would have this closed community that I created just for them, just so I can get questions and answers. And I'm like, perfect. Now let's start doing this together. And so, things start kind of moving and it wasn't easy, especially with these guys that are about to retire but they got it. They started to understand it and you just had to put it in their terms, I guess.
Well, let's hold it now. We'll
Yeah.
actually carry the conversation in the next run. But I think what's important on this one in particular is to hear.
You like how I always get off on.
No, it's okay. That's why I
start
kind
thinking
of
about some other
I'm
things.
going to pull you back in.
All right.
No, because what started off was that I want people to understand the complexity that we had at the company, right?
Yeah.
That there was, we're talking about when we had individuals who thought that what I did was to get likes on Google, likes on Facebook, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's where we started, and so even though the content strategy may be simple to others and those listening, like, well, of course, that's where you first go. It was not an easy thing, right?
That's a good point.
Because even on the support side, we actually had to change the support process so that we could actually get the content out. And by the way, the content was never stored, so we had to create that mechanism. Then we had to train them on how to do it, and then we had to train them on how to find insights in the customer. So just that alone, which in other companies may seem like
Yeah.
was brand new, right?
I don't know. I think maybe community managers might think, duh, but I don't think that companies necessarily think that. They don't know. I remember somebody asked me the other day, they go, Chris, how does one become a community manager? I go, well, if you've got a long, if you get, it's a long story, but I could tell you how it just happened, and so I did. But it doesn't. It's somewhat easy for us, or at least we understand it, and it's not so easy for almost any organization that I know of, unless they've done it for a long time.
Yeah, and maybe that's another thing that is important about the things we like to talk about, which is, yes, I think we have community managers, but this is when we talk, we're talking about when the rubber meets the road. How do you actually get some of this stuff done?
Yeah.
And this is some of our experiences, right? Sometimes the right answer is what we did, right? We actually go and do it. We created the process.
Yeah.
Even though that's not in our job description, but we did it anyway.
You make me want to think, talk about all these things that we did at Rexel, and so it's funny because, and I won't get into all of it, but I would say is community was just a third of our job, and that's the interesting thing.
And I
So,
wonder how many community managers also believe, or they may be fighting two things. I think this is just a piece of something larger.
Yeah.
Maybe I should go fight that battle, or I can't get my job done until these things are solved.
Yeah.
How do I do it? Right? We facing both sides. But for this one, let's go ahead and close off, and want to thank those. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast today. My name is Michael Sandoval.
And I'm Chris Detzel.
Thank you very much, and we'll meet you next time.
All right.